Hello, so this is the second video on Simplex algorithm. On the first video, we set up this linear programming problem as a Simplex Tableau. So if you haven't watched the first one, make sure you go back and do that because that's really, really important. Sometimes the exam questions are just doing that part, okay? So we're going to, now we've got our Simplex Tableau set up, we're going to go through, it's going to be 2 iterations of the Simplex algorithm in order to maximize this objective function up here. Okay, so the first step to the Simplex algorithm is identifying something called a pivot variable. Okay, so the first thing you do is to look for the most negative number in your objective row. So this is our objective row. Because that's got our objective function in it. And the most negative is that -3 there. Okay. So that means that the X column is our pivot column. Okay, so that's important, pivot column. All right. Now that means we know that our pivot value is in there somewhere, or our pivot element is sometimes called. Now, in order to work out which of these 3 numbers is our pivot element, we need to work out a ratio, okay? So that's what this column is for. The ratio is sometimes called theta, okay? It doesn't matter which you use. So in order to work out the ratios, you do the value, so the right-hand value from each of the equations, divided by the number in the pivot column. So for this one, it would be 9 divided by 3, so that's 3. For this one, it would be 12 divided by 2, so it's 6. And for this one, it's never going to be this one because we've gone for the most negative, but we will write it in anyway, just so that it's sort of complete. Okay. Now, in order to choose the right one, we want to go for the lowest non-negative, the lowest positive, sorry. We don't want any negative ones. So in this case, we're going to go for, so our smallest positive value of theta is this one here, okay, so the top row, okay, and that means that number there, okay, so it's in our pivot column, and that was our lowest positive value of theta. So that number there is our pivot element. Okay, so I will just write that down because that's really important vocab. So that's our pivot element. So it all hinges around that number. Okay. We don't need the row operations column in this first table ever, but I just thought I'd add it in so that they were all consistent. Now, we're going to do the first iteration of the simplex method now. The first thing you want to do is you want to make your pivot element 1. So you want to multiply or divide by a certain number so that that is 1, and you do the same thing to the whole row. Okay, so in order to make that 1, we'd want to divide by 3. So this is where we write our row operations. So we're going to do row 1, and we're going to divide it by 3. Okay, so this divided by 3 is 1. This divided by 3 is 1/3. This divided by 3 is 1/3. This divided by 3 is 0. And this divided by 3 is 3. Okay. And what we've done here is we've increased the value of x. So I'll come back to that. So that becomes our new basic variable. Okay, but I'll come back to the graph that we drew earlier in a minute. Now, the first aim was to make that 1. The second aim is to make these 2, so all the other elements in our pivot column, to make them 0. Okay, and we need to do that by adding or subtracting multiples of this row now. Okay, so in order to make that 0, I'd want to subtract 2 lots of that. So my row operations is going to be row 2 from up here, take away 2 lots of row 1 from down here. Now, I always use the 2 fingers. I know that sounds a bit silly, but it just means that you don't lose track of what you're doing. So that take away 2 lots of that is 0. That take away 2 lots of that is 7/3. That take away 2 lots of that is -2. -2/3. That take away 2 lots of that is 1. That take away 2 lots of that is 6. Okay. Okay, so that's that row done. We haven't changed our basic variable in that one, so the basic variable is still S2. We only change one basic variable in each iteration. Okay, and it's always the one, the pivot element, basically that changes to that always. So you always go across to the pivot element and it changes to that. So the last column, we want to make this 0 as well. So in order to do that, I'd want to do this row 3, and I'd want to add 3 lots of row 1. Okay, so that plus 3 lots of that is 0. That plus 3 lots of that is -1. That plus 3 lots of that is 1. That plus 3 lots of that is 0. That plus 3 lots of that is 9. Okay, so again, just so I'm looking at the right rows, I honestly think the 2 finger thing sounds stupid, but works. Okay, so that's my first iteration of the simplex algorithm done. I'm just quickly going to refer back to our graph from earlier, just so you can see what's happening. So we've gone from a situation where x and y were 0 up here. So that was when x and y were 0, we were down at our origin. And what we've done is here, we've increased the value of x, okay? So our new basic variable, the value of our basic variable has changed to 3, okay? Y is still 0. So what that's done is it's taken us up to this vertex here. So it's taken us up where x is 3 and y is 0. And earlier on, we worked out that the objective function value was 9 here, which ties in nicely because when x is 3, the value of the objective function is 9. So it's kind of seeking out that maximum solution there, okay, that maximum value of the objective function. So it's kind of taken us from there to there. You can probably predict that next it's going to take us up here, okay, but we'll see. Okay, so we're going to do the next iteration. Now, I should have said before, we know we're not at the optimal solution because there are still negative values in our objective row. So if there are still negatives in this, then we need to continue and do another iteration. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is work out the ratios so that we can figure out what our new pivot element is. So it's going to be in the y column because that's the most negative value. So we know it's going to be in that column there. So that's my pivot column. And my ratios, it's the value divided by the corresponding element in the pivot column. So 3 divided by 1/3 is 9. 6 divided by 7/3 is 18/7. And we don't need this one because it's going to be negative, and we don't ever choose a negative ratio. So we want the smallest positive ratio. That's the one we go for, and that's this one. So that makes that number there, that's 7/3. That's our pivot element. Okay, so it all hinges around that one. Now, I said before that we know that we're changing the basic variable into so we go along to the pivot element and up, and it changes into that one. So I quite like to fill these in first, just so I get my rows in the right place. So the X remains the same. The S2 will change to a Y. So what that means is we are increasing our Y values. So that actually seems really nice that we've already increased our X. Now we're going to increase our Y, and maybe we will end up there. And there's a P. So it's nice. I quite like to start with the row that has the pivot element in. So we're going to try and make that into a 1. That's our aim. So in order to do that, the row operation would just be row 2 divided by 7/3. So 7/3 divided by 7/3. So I'll just put that on the right side there. So it's going to be 0 divided by 7/3 is 0. 7/3 divided by 7/3 is 1. Minus 2/3 divided by 7/3 is minus 2/7. 1 divided by 7/3 is 3/7. 6 divided by 7/3 is 18/7. Okay, so that's that row done, and I've got my pivot element is now 1, so that has changed into a 1, so that's good. And just as last time, we want to make the other elements in the pivot column 0. So to do that, and I want to do it by adding or subtracting multiples of this row here. So 1/3, if I take away 1/3 of row 2, that'll do it. So it's row 1, take away 1/3 of row 2. So it's a bit squashed in there. So I'm going to do that for the whole thing. So this is where the 2 fingers come in again. That, take away 1/3 of that is 1. That, take away 1/3 of that is 0. That, take away 1/3 of that is 3/7. That, take away 1/3 of that. So sorry, that, take away 1/3 of that is minus 1/7. And that, take away 1/3 of that is 15/7. Okay. So that's the top column, the top row done there. And then the bottom one, I want to make that into a 0. So actually that's quite easy. I just do that, add one lot of that. So it's just row 3, add my new row 2. So it's always like the old row, and then a multiple of the new one. So that, add that is 0. That, add that is 0. That, add that is 5/7. That, add that is 3/7. And that, add that is 81/7.